Okay, it's just about 7 o'clock, so I'm going to start the meeting. If there's cookies and coffee in the back and tea, so if you want some lovely things, just go for it. Welcome and good evening. My name is Barbara Cooper, and I'm the chair of the Fidalgo Democrats. And I want to thank everybody for coming out on this rather cold, breezy evening. So thank you. We'd like to start the meeting with an acknowledgement. We, the Fidalgo Democrats, acknowledge that we gather on indigenous land, the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Samish and Swinomish people, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and future. If you are not on our mailing list, please be sure to sign in the back and put down your email and phone number. The sign-in sheet is on the table there, so please make sure you use it. We don't send out a lot of emails, so you won't get too crazy with lots of emails, which people are always worried about. We let you know about upcoming meetings and a few important events. Please, I always remind people, write in your best handwriting, so if you want to get on the list, we can actually read what you did. I'm going to do this right now. Before we go any further, please turn off your cell phones. Easy to not do. Okay, the front door of the library is locked, so you have to leave through either that door or this door here. The bathrooms are in the back. And go out this door and go to your left and you'll see them. Again, there's cookies. Thank you, Rita Sullivan. And I appreciate that. Yay, Rita. All right. The Fidalgo Democrats are an independent democratic association with a focus on education. I want to remind everybody that we are not a PAC. We cannot endorse candidates or contribute to their campaigns. We do, however, invite Democratic candidates to talk about issues and legislation. We don't charge dues, but we will pass the hat at some point, and thank you for your contribution. I do want to let you know that the last couple of months we had some money in our budget, and we donated money to the Southern Poverty Law Center and the World Central Kitchen. And we wanted to support those two organizations. We also volunteer at the Brick Dinner. Our next Brick Dinner, we're going to do Easter. We decided our group was a good group for Easter. So I want to let everybody know the meeting is being recorded by Zane Butler and will be available on our YouTube channel in a few days. And if you're on our mailing list, you'll get the email of how to watch that. And feel free to pass it on to people who might be interested in watching the meeting. Rita sends it out with Zane's help. Just to let you know, if you walk in front of the camera, you will be recorded. So just be aware. So don't walk and stand in the middle of the aisle. That's a reminder to myself as well. Our next meeting is going to be March 12th. We're back to the second Tuesday. And we're going to have some members from the City Council and the Planning Department talking about the comprehensive plan and housing affordability, community services, and what's going on with the city. So that should be a kind of an interesting meeting as well. Just a couple of things. Before I announce the speakers, I'd like to ask if there are any elected officials, Democratic Party officials like PCOs. Please just raise your hand and introduce yourself. I know Sarah.
PCO, Sarah Peterson.
And Rita Sullivan. And
PCO.
And Andrea Dahl. And Lee, are you?
Lee, PCO for Dewey Beach.
All right, thank you all for all the work you do. I also like to make a quick thank you to Dawn Ambrose, who edits the Skagit Democrats newsletter, who always is wonderful about putting stuff in. Again, if you want to get their newsletter, just get on the website, Skagit Democrats, and sign up. Also, Carol and Rich Tamler do the Whidbey Island newsletter monthly, and Doreen Sadler sends out her Facebook page. And just to let you know, there is that ongoing rally Sunday afternoon from 12 to 1 on the corner of Commercial and 12th. So if anyone wants to do that, please feel free. I'm now going to introduce, sitting over here is Reverend Terry Kyler, who is the Director of Paths to Understanding, Bridging Bias and Building Unity. Terry works to counter Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, Christian supremacy, and other forms of dehumanization. He believes we can recognize and honor one another's humanity. A graduate of the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago, he began his pastoral career in 1991 and has served in partnership between Episcopalians and Lutherans since 2004. Terry was the recipient of the Faith Action Network Interfaith Leadership Award in 2016, the Interfaith Leadership Award from the Muslim Association of Puget Sound in 2017, and the Sultan and St. Peace Award in 2017, and the Call to Lead Award in 2018 by the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago. So we're very, very pleased that Terry is here to share with us and help us through these rather complicated times. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much. Let me make sure I get this going. Oh, it's on. Okay, there it is. So I would like us to start, though, by introducing my friend Kay Knott, who is an elder in the Upper Skagit tribe. She was just over this evening doing another kind of work, helping at a funeral this evening. There was a prayer vigil. A prayer vigil for a member of the Suttamish tribe who died recently. So she's here tonight because she thinks that the work that we're doing here is very important. But let's also remember the other work that our friends are doing just a few miles away. And please be sure to send them your best intention for a few minutes at some point tonight. So Kay, will you please stand up and share with us the blessing of Vi Hilbert and her encouragement to us.
Gulapu hasayayu, gulapu diishid, squaha halitza tatsda to all Skagit. My Skagit name is Squaha Halitza. My Pasta Utsid name, my English name is Kay Knott. And it is important for me to be here. Please keep Swinomish in your thoughts. This is, I think, the fourth funeral in the last couple weeks, and there's been at least 7 amongst the tribes lately. And so there's a lot of grief there, and your support and sending them your thoughts would be wonderful. But Terry is right. I've done that work for many years, vigil work, standing with families when they're in loss. And this work is as important to me. And so the prayer leaders let me go first so I could come over here and be with you, because what you do is important and how you do it is important. So I'm going to share a blessing from Vi Hilbert, one of our Skagit elders, and I hope you appreciate her words as much as I do. Gulapu Si'ab Di'ishid, Tigwi Tabuthachaf, Tigwi Tabuthachaf, Daiha Ts Sukopcha Alts Laheo, As Quadit Sucha, As Ushub Tabuthcha, Shak Siab Siab Di'ishid, Utigwi Tabuthachaf Alti Diala, Uthali, Si'ab, Ukwahal Tagolcha, Ukwahal Tagolcha. To all of you dear people, we thank you, we give thanks. It is good that you could be here today. We pray and humble ourselves to our Creator. We give thanks that all of you are here. We help each other. We help each other in this way. We strengthen one another.
Thank you so much, Kay. And thank you to all of you for inviting me tonight. I do want to begin by saying that of all the work I've done in the last each 10 years has put me in many difficult situations. And tonight, I have to tell you, I have a certain heaviness of heart in just even talking about the conversation we're going to have tonight. And that's because I recognize the deep pain and that it can cause people, especially those that have directly impacted or their families are directly impacted by the kind of dynamics we're talking about tonight. And so I just want you to know that I'm approaching tonight with a great deal of fear and trembling and with a deep sense of inadequacy. But it's not the most inadequate I've ever felt. The most inadequate I've ever felt was about 3 weeks ago when I was invited by a rabbi friend of mine to come and join a small gathering at Hillel near UW to listen to 9 hostage families share their story. And so we're sitting there in this room, there's about 50, 60 people hearing the stories of these young people, many of them, one of them a twin, whose twin brother is still being held. And to see the courage and the grief and the self-control and the kind of desperate effort that she was trying to do to get her brother out was incredible. My daughters are twin daughters. And so I was asked as I entered the room if I would offer the interfaith response to this group. So I need to tell you that I don't feel as out of my league tonight as I did then. Around my neck here is a dog tag that young lady gave me, hoping for the release of her brother. And she asked me to wear this, especially when I do work. But I also have in my pocket a small piece of tile from a home in Jerusalem that was from a Palestinian, I believe it was a Christian, a Palestinian Christian family who had waited 12 years to get a building permit for a home on land they owned. They built the home, and then one weekend the bulldozers came. So so I'm wearing this one in my pocket, right near my heart. So when the events of October 7th happened, of course, the whole world was devastated, and there is so much that we have to recognize all that pain. So before I begin, really, as I begin, I want to share with you what I try to do. There's a lot of pressure on me as an interfaith leader to write a smarty pants blog post about the whole thing. And I can be a smarty pants. And I have a blog and I have a keyboard. Unfortunately, our website's down at the moment, but it will come up again soon. But I really resisted that. I got on the phone with some friends. I talked with the rabbi on our board. I talked with the Muslim leader on our board. I talked with the Sikh leaders of the Sikh community. I talked with Kay. And so that week I went down to an event called the Vigil for Israel. And I wasn't comfortable with everything that was said there, but it was so important to show up, right? And Kay went down with me to that event. And the rabbis would walk up and say, "Thank you for being here," right? And it wasn't easy to be there. I've been to other events also where it was not easy to be there, and some things were said in the Muslim community I wasn't exactly comfortable with. But I tried to be there. But that Friday afternoon, I went down for the 1 o'clock Jummah service for the Muslim Association of Puget Sound. And I walked in with my collar and everything, and they all know me. A lot of them know me there pretty well. And they thanked me for being there, and I said I had to come. And you could just see that they were relieved because somebody showed up for them. we're just distancing from them and blaming them for the actions of a small group. And I said, tonight I'm going to go to a Shabbat service. And I want you to know that. And every single one of the 20 Muslims or so that I talked to about that, they all went, oh, thank you for doing that. They must feel so alone and afraid right now. So then a few hours later, after talking to a lot of people, I had dinner with some rabbis and went to a Shabbat service. And every one of the people there was so thankful I was there, that they weren't just being, people weren't walking away, distancing themselves. And I said, well, I had to be here. And I said, I was over at the mosque today. And I must have talked to 15, 20 people. I don't know what the number was. Didn't have a clicker, But I said I was over there today, and they went, oh, I'm so glad you did that. They have to be feeling so alone and sad right now. So much of the conversation in the country around the issues of Israel-Palestine are framed in terms of like really hardened policy positions and purity sort of ethics that our larger culture gets us to get into. And so I thought I needed to be in a relationship with people instead of just making a smarty pants policy thing, right? Not that all of that's wrong, right? We'll get to that too. So Paths to Understanding, we have a lot of stuff that we do. We have a podcast, we have a significant YouTube channel. We work to counter anti-Muslim bigotry, anti-Semitism, and anti-Indigenous bigotry, and many other forms of bigotry. We have a project happening in Skagit County called Let's Go Together, where we're bringing over 30 organizations across lines of culture and tradition and economic circumstance, life circumstance, to come together and eat and share stories, do a service project day, and then have a public event at the Lincoln Theater, where people where leaders in diverse traditions will stand up and they'll have about 2 minutes to share why it's important for them, out of their tradition, to recognize people in every group as fully human. That's going to be a powerful event, and we're piloting it here in Skagit because we are among the most isolated and segregated communities across lines of tradition and culture and life circumstance. And we hope that that's going to help. We're also launching this next week or so a thing called Potluck for Democracy, which will go across to our partners across the nation to encourage communities of wisdom, social clubs, seroptimists, whoever it is out there, atheist, agnostic groups, whatever, to get together across the same kind of lines and have one event called a Potluck for Democracy. And let the community know that even though things are pretty heated up and folks seem pretty polarized, we're just fine getting along with each other. And that's really important. So our organization began with a rabbi, a priest, and a Protestant pastor having a conversation on TV as equals in the 1960s. So Rabbi Levine there on the right had the idea to counter anti-Catholic sentiment that was on the rise. And they did so on Como TV, 26 episodes a year or so, for 14 years. And they talked as equals about the issues of the day. So tonight, we're going to be asking you all to do some conversation with each other, and we encourage you to, I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but just be really respectful and listen to each other. We don't have to solve any problems tonight. We just need to learn how to listen to each other. And I also think it's important that we be clear that I don't like to use the word religion because nobody knows what it means. And actually the religion of our culture is producing and consuming. That's the religion of our society, because that is the story that is the ligament that ties our society together, right? So remember Bill Clinton's famous campaign strategy behind, it's the what, stupid? Okay, so they identified the correct religion of the day. But so for us, a wisdom tradition is a set of remembered stories, practices, deep truths, probing questions, and a capacity for self-critique So if you don't have a capacity for self-critique, you're not a wisdom tradition, right? That's kind of rude, but it's kind of true. And we include Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Sikhism, Christianity, Islam, Taoism, indigenous, agnostic, atheist, humanist, and many other traditions. So when I'm up here talking about this and I'm wearing this collar, I include atheists and agnostics in our definition of a wisdom tradition. Okay? So just in case you're kind of wigged out by religion, which I totally understand, just remember that. So tonight I want us to remember our common humanity. I want you to remember who you are as a humanoid life form, that is good, right? That is valuable. I want to think about the common humanity of those who are around you tonight and those that were around you today. And remember the common humanity of those around the room. And so as we do this, I'd like us, to get into groups of 2 just for a few minutes. And you can answer just one of these questions, for a minute. But I'll just ask you to reflect on the first. I think we'll do that. How has this last 4 months been for you emotionally with the events of October 7th and the conflict since then? Just ask yourself that question for a second. Just ask yourself that question. And then a second question, who do you know that's directly impacted by the conflict in Israel, Palestine, or Gaza? And then, what do you hope people will understand about you as you have a conversation? Right? So turn to someone else and just answer one of those questions, whichever one kind of fits you. You're not going to have a long time, because we got to get out of here at 8, because we got to go to bed, right? So, I'm just kidding. So we'll give you about 5 minutes for this conversation. Ready, set, go.
I don't know anybody who's directly. I don't
Talk to a young person.
I'm not a politician.
No, neither is he. I just say, it was interesting for me, something that supported as 10th graders. At least actually more so than 7th graders. It was like really There were a lot of voices.
let's say. And, I kind of picked up on that in some of the and I mean, I'd like to understand, but
Some of us
yeah, I mean, so it's just, yeah, that's the beginning, and the end, I mean, whatever, but that has to be solved. That has to be solved. I personally don't regard things the way we should have, just like, but to me that just not really is a fundamental issue. I think anything that kind of holds Right, yeah.
Well, and it's interesting. You know,
Yeah. No, right. But yeah, this thing started. And obviously, and those people are still there.
About 1 more minute.
Well, I mean, I'm interested in friends with her. Interested in this, and I think he referenced that event later this month, and I was kind of yeah, I live in Anacortes, and I'm also with the oh, okay. Oh, where at? Oh, really? Okay. Last February, my daughter was Paige in the 70s, and you kind of know his love and so we both did camps for Olympia. And yeah, so I teach online, so I had to free myself up.
30 seconds.
Great time. It was really yeah. Philosophy.
Okay, friends. I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's always the rudest thing. I always feel rude. I go home, before I go to bed at night, I think, man, you were rude interrupting all those people. So do you notice kind of where the conversation started? What did you notice that's different about starting the conversation here around emotion or around who you know, or what do you want people to understand versus immediately going to policy or to foreign policy kind of issues, right? You notice what happened with that? And so what did that do for your ability to hear the other person, do you think? Yeah, it kind of felt a little easier, didn't it? But one of the frames that I like to apply here is that we are in this country and in the world both dangerously unequal and we are dangerously divided. And that's kind of the challenge of a lot of folks in the moderate to progressive part of is that we're concerned about both of those, right? Now, I know that in politics, you have to, in terms of public messaging, draw a sharp distinction between the policies, the outcomes that the policies you're advocating for may engender, and those of another party. And so that's about contrast and not about unity. And I understand that we're in a contrasting year. But I think one of the problems of not recognizing these two dynamics as very important is that it can also tear apart communities that are working. It can tear apart coalitions that are working to deal with justice, right? Because we kind of forget to recognize that we have to work for our unity and to hear each other and to honor our humanity at the same time. And so what I also think is happening in our country is exclusive in-group superiority. So groups are saying that we're the only really smart ones, we're the only really human ones, and those people that disagree with us or have a different tradition, or those that have a tradition, because we know us, atheists are the smartest, or Lutherans say that the Episcopalians are crazy, whatever. That is at work in us, and that is at work in our society in ways that are very difficult for us to identify. Secondly, that once we see each other in this way, it's easy to start dehumanizing other groups, and we have to understand where dehumanization leads. It is not just, words may never harm me. The words that harm us lead to sticks and stones. That happens. It's a permission structure for violence. But we have to also think about how human beings make decisions. As we are beginning to approach this conversation, either with friends or with other groups, or really almost any other discussion as well, that human beings are not as logical as we like to think we are. Now, I know that that's not true for me. I know I'm logical, but I think that most of you are not. And especially Kay, no, I'm just kidding. Because most of us, according to social scientists, but also many wisdom traditions, make very quick decisions based on our in-group biases. We make gut level decisions based on a set of values, pre-verbal almost values, and then out of that gut reaction, we then begin to receive information that supports us, and we begin to reject information that goes against our position. And then we then begin to justify our actions. Because once you've done an action based on your values, it's pretty hard to turn around and say you're not right. That's why the Nazis used blood cement. They got blood cement. It was called blood cement. They asked young SS officers to kill a puppy or break a window of a Jewish shop. And once they achieved that, did an action, that was against their moral core, they were held captive because they had to go on justifying their action. And so we have to understand that right now we have social media at work in us, and we have media at work, not just on our phones, but in us. And what they found in 2015, what the AI found, was that the best way to keep people online and thus looking at ads and thus making Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and everything else money was moral outrage against an outgroup. So they would target you based on the angry emojis that you would click, the angry reactions. They would target you with outgroups that said that those outgroups were engaging in reprehensible behavior that was detrimental to our society and against everything that we love. And then we would start writing posts about them. And then other people would see our post, and they would be targeted by the algorithm for what they like against a group they disliked. Do you see? And that has impacted not only the people who are on Facebook and YouTube all the time, it has impacted all of us because it activates our amygdala. Our amygdala is our fear center. So remember that moral outrage or anger is not based on hating people, it's based on protecting what we love. So the way this whole system works is it targets what we love to turn us into haters of each other. That is what it does. So social media weaponized our love for ourselves and our community and our values and our nation and humanity to turn us into people who hate each other. So that's the way hate works. Now, I'm not talking about avowed white supremacists, but people that are flirting with it often get into it because they are taught falsely to believe that what they love is being threatened by another group. So I've done 90 presentations in public with American Muslims across the state and the country. I've been in like 300 or more clubs and churches and groups and whatever, and everywhere I go, people think that when they're hating on Muslims or Jews or indigenous people or immigrants, they think that they're protecting what they love. And that it's easy to get started because we have a strong in-group bias. And we get this gut reaction against them, and then we go on the internet and look at research, often created by hate groups, okay, who know how this works. And so the fact is that we have team-based news sources, we have confirmation bias, social media targeting that are placing us into bubbles, often against each other, and then we are buying into a lie. And the lie that is so rampant in our country right now is that our identity and our humanity is contained in or dependent upon our political party or ideology. You are not human if you're a Republican, you are not human if you're a Democrat. And that is a lie that is really tough to fight. But that is a really, this is a technical term, that is a sucky identity. Okay? Because again, it places you outside, it places us outside to some degree of moral or ethical reflection. Right? If your identity is reduced to being a supporter of this candidate or that candidate, well, where else do you go? You're all in. You've already made your allegiance cement to that group, and so you can't move on. And so even as we're in this political season of trying to identify what policies we're advocating for and what positive outcomes they might produce, we are really fighting this lie that our identity is dependent upon our political ideology, and that is a problem. But let's step back for a minute, and I'm a pastor, so I think about these things. Human life and life on this planet is inherently good, right? Inherently good and beautiful. We are also, as human beings, and the rest of the creation is this way too, constrained by limits and mortality. This is true all the time. It leads some people to reject human life, actually. And I could talk theologically about you with that, but I won't. But what this leads to is a real strong sense of anxiety in human beings. We often identify this anxiety as something that is context dependent. But it really isn't, y'all. We'd feel anxious if everything was perfect in the world. We'd still feel anxious about our mortality and that we might fall off a cliff or something and break a leg, right? We'd still feel some anxiety. But what happens in human beings is someone comes along and they say there's a threat to what you love, and it taps into this latent anxiety that's just underneath the surface a lot of the times, and then boom, out it comes, right? But this understanding of our inherent goodness and our limits and mortality, that they're both true at the same time, not only leads to anxiety, it also leads us into the practice of ethics, right? And this is something that I really think that many moderates and progressives in this country do very well, and there are those on the more conservative right that also think very carefully about ethics. We should say that. And so one way to understand ethics is that everything and everyone we interact with is good in and of themselves and thus of intrinsic worth. When human beings interact with the creation or the world, the value of each part of it and each person must be held together. We may compete for resources, but we compete as equally valuable beings in a limited universe. So there is only so much land to go around, right? There's only so much food. Unless, of course, we're borrowing from future generations, but that's another problem, right? And so ethics is really about holding valuable things in one hand and valuable things in another hand, and trying to figure out how we're going to do it. And of course, that's been complicated beautifully by the awareness that we not only do ethics intrapersonally inside of ourselves, we not only do them interpersonally in conversation, but institutions and structures are important places where ethical reflection is required, and there is brokenness And there is trauma that has been caused by each of these four. There is trauma in me, there's trauma because progressives and moderates do not carefully enough message around the good things and the things we need to work on. And so part of it is inherently thinking of the vision of the world as it is and the world as we envision it and trying to figure out a pathway from one to the other. Now, what happens so often in my experience is that some in the progressive community, now I'm talking to the more progressive community tonight, I would say it differently if I were talking to conservatives, so I would give them some stuff too, just so you know, is that, and moderates, I got lots of words for their passivity. Just want to say that, is that so often we come across with this vision of the world that's very purity-based. But if you ask them for a minute, like, what is your strategy for getting from the world as it is to the world as it comes, they just repeat their purity phrase. I'm a cisgender white male with lots of privilege, and I know, like that whole thing. And I think that's an important awareness. But it is not adequate to the situation we are in. It is just simply not adequate. And so can we learn in this ethical kind of, deliberation about institutions and structures and interpersonal stuff, that we are both good and limited in the middle of all of that. Every sentence, every word we utter is limited, and we're also good in the middle of it. And so can we lead without having to win, to trust without having to be certain, to seek truth without having to have the answer? And that's fine for you all, but I have the one. And to try without having to succeed. Can we do that? So what I kind of see us do a lot of times is we're weighing in the conversation about Israel, Palestine, and Gaza, we're trying to weigh what the ultimate policy decision or whose team someone is on. Right away. Like there's no grace, there's no listening, we're just constantly interrogating every little word. And so we got to figure out if they support Israel, if they want religious hostages, if they want to counter anti-Semitism, or if they want to have a two-state solution, a ceasefire, and counter Islamophobia. Right? But my friend Ahmed here wants both. He wants all those things and more. So do we imagine in this media context in which we're us versus theming all the time, shaming and blaming all the time, that actually there are people who want all of those and more, who recognize the trauma of the Jewish people, who recognize the trauma of the Palestinian people in this conversation. And so my friend Hannah, who's now joined our staff as our youth engagement director, she told me this last week that this was like the first couple of weeks where she could even have public conversation about this, because she knows people not on both sides, but on every side. On every side. I talked to one of the hostage family members, came up and talked to me some after my attempt to be human with them. It took me 3 days to recover from that. She walked up to me and she said, we care about people on the other side of the border too. Think about that. She kind of teared up when she said that. And she's got a family member in a town. And we can't have a conversation with each other that's respectful and thoughtful and holds many things in talking together. Now, I understand again that we have to message. So when I was doing those big public events, we thought very carefully about our messaging. Okay, we didn't say things like love trumps hate, because we didn't want to mirror Donald Trump's language to try to counter Donald Trump, because that gives Donald Trump more power. Right? We tried to talk about the aspirational values of the country. Right? So we would carefully try to moderate so that people could have a complex view and still come along with us. And you could see people in the room start to relax as the meeting went on. So let's go back and think about another polarizing conversation, in which we often deny our own complexity. Do we believe in equitable treatment for all people by police institutions? The investigations of police bias, accountability for police for bias incidents, and ongoing bias and bigotry training for all people? Or do we believe in good policing of neighborhoods, appreciation for the many good acts of police, support for police officers, and more spending to strengthen other community services? Can one person believe all those things? Right, and so but what's happening in many parts of our country, especially the moderate to progressive communities, is that we are fracturing our alliances and our coalitions because we're not taking a few minutes to ask each other what we have at stake, if we know anybody there, and we go so quickly to the policy implications of a statement. And you can tell it happening when your gut starts to churn and get tight when someone's speaking, and you can tell when they look at you with that look like this, like they're like, what are you really trying to say? Whose team are you really on? And all of that is powered, right, by human nature, by who human beings are, and it's also amplified by all the things we talked about today. And like you all know that. So just reflect on yourself, like on a scale of maybe 1 to 10. How important are these issues to you? Russia, Ukraine, the conflicts in Central Africa, Uyghurs in China. Y'all know who that is, right? Okay. Water systems in Flint, Michigan. Political violence that's been happening recently. Israel, Gaza, Palestine. Just ask yourself which of these, like, you would probably put an 8, 9, or a 10 by. Okay, so what's interesting is, why is it that the Uyghurs, for instance, in China, 1.5 million people or so in re-education and genocidal camps, why is it we're not in the street about them? Why have we continued to buy things from Amazon.com with Prime-free shipping? Right? Yeah, I mean, it's really hard. And so then we have to start to ask ourselves, okay, so what's going on with that? So as a Christian, I'll say, like, part of the problem in the Christian community, on the progressive and moderate Christians, and on the right, there's other problems in addition, is that we often read the Hebrew scriptures and we read the prophetic messages in the Hebrew scripture. And then we assume that the state of Israel is uniquely responsible for living out those prophetic values. So would we want the United States of America, for instance, to be accountable to all of those prophetic statements? How often has the United States of America lived up to any of them? So as a Christian, I've been realizing ever since I started this multi-faith work, this to counter dehumanization, just how much bias and bigotry I have built into me. And that if I have an ethical foundation, well, that's great, but the challenge is, like, how much of it is based on various forms of bigotry against Jews, against Muslims, against indigenous people, right? So it's incredibly fascinating. So I'm going to skip through some things here because I overachieved, as I often do. So I just want to say that since October 7th, from October 7th to about December 15th, there were 2,100 hate incidents following October 7th. 2,100 against Muslims, 2,100 against our Jewish neighbors in this country. Did you know that every Jewish community, every Jewish organization has to spend an increased amount of money on security? One small Jewish community, they rent space, pays $800 to $1,000 a week for their security. So one of the things I've encouraged Christian communities to do, and other communities, is to hold a fundraiser to defray 1 week's of security expenses. I've also asked people to go and stand outside of mosques and Jewish temples right now. with signs of welcome, having asked the rabbis and imams if that's okay, and let the community know that these strange people aren't standing out there to protest against them, but to say we're glad you're our neighbors. So there's a ton of stuff out there. So now let's talk about some lenses that Hannah and I, Hannah's sick tonight, or she would be here, really see operative in this conversation. First is the colonization lens. And the whole colonization conversation is an important one and has benefits as a lens, but we often, sometimes on the progressive side, think of it as the only lens. And if we do look at Israel, Palestine, and Gaza in that lens, we have to ask ourselves how many centuries back we want to go. Why are we applying the colonization lens only to the state of Israel, when there's a whole lot of other colonizing forces and regional powers interacting and doing all kinds of things for their own benefit and not caring about the Palestinian people? It's very complicated. I also wonder, and part of this comes out of my relationship with Kay, and I'm not putting these words on her, these are my reflections. I wonder sometimes how much a progressive to moderate reflection and anger at the state of Israel comes from our awareness that we are standing on stolen land. And so we're angry at them because we're really angry at ourselves, but we don't want to face that. That's a hard truth to say. It's also a hard truth to say to myself, right? So it's a good lens, but it doesn't account for everything. Some people want to reduce it to religion versus religion. And there have been many studies that show that religion plays a role, but it's hardly ever the only role in about 7 to 15% of conflicts in history. So I've heard recently some leaders say, oh, this is a religion versus religion thing. No, it's not. It plays a role. It's part of a collective identity. It does play a role in a lot of things, but one of the things I hear, and I'm going to say this, is that there is some anti-religious bigotry on the Democratic left that assumes that intergroup rivalry and dehumanization is primarily a function of religion, which is an assumption that is itself a dehumanizing rhetoric against people who attend wisdom traditions. It is an exclusive in-grouping on behalf of those that are angry at religion and blame religious people for all the problems of the world. And then we wonder why people of faith don't want to come and vote Democrat. I'll say that. We're buying into certain narratives that aren't necessarily always true, that the wars of religion in Europe and 200 or 300 years ago were wars against religion. Well, guess what? It was the nation states that were forming to grab land that called it the wars of religion to justify their taking land and power. I'm not saying the church has done great things in the West. We could talk for a long time about that. But we got to be careful about what's really going on underneath our guts as we come into these conversations. And of course, we have our favorite one, the end times. Hallelujah. God has written in the book of Revelation a whole timeline of the end of the world, and Israel's got to claim all this land back and all this other kind of stuff. And then God can come and do what? Engage in the fundamental destruction of Jewish people, which is an anti-Semitic frame. That's a horrible frame. Oh my gosh. We got to work against that one. It's also possible to see it as two communities in conflict to create a nation state for themselves in a land that has been constantly overrun by one empire or another for 3,500 years or so. So we got to think about strategies with each other. So I know that like you all are going to be thinking through these things and then working through like what could be our policy that we want to propose to our elected leaders. And what I really have appreciated this last year is Loretta Ross Smith, who's a womanist theologian. She's worked with hate groups. So she's an African American woman who went and worked with not only pedophiles and got to know them and to see them as human beings. She also worked with hate groups, anti-black hate groups in the South. And her teacher taught her how can you work with anybody and help them to change if you don't see them as human beings and don't love them first? And she said, how am I supposed to love those people? And he said, well, that's your problem. Go figure out how to do it. And she did. And she says that there's far too much, even though it is sometimes appropriate, of calling out. And that is like, Kay says something wrong in the group, and I'm going to call Kay out right now because she's not on the right side of this and that or the next thing, right? And there's times when it's appropriate to call out people, especially when they're in elected office, and to hold them publicly accountable. And that's kind of what that part of politics is for. But when we do that inside of a group, what we are really saying is that we have to agree with each other and form a cohesive belief on 100% of all the issues. And I don't know about you, but I don't agree with myself on 100% of the issues. I have conversation happening in me and tensions and conflict. And she says that movements that require 100% conformity are not movements, they're cults. Because we never agree with everybody, and we have to have the maturity to speak to each other when we agree on 90% of issues, to learn how to talk to and work with people who agree with us on 75% of the issues, on 50% of the issues, and maybe learn to have at least a civil conversation with someone who agrees with us 25% of the time. Even though that conversation is not the same. And there's a beautiful 14-minute YouTube video from her. I encourage you to find it and watch it because she is a boss. She's incredible. What she encourages more is calling in. I want to get to know you better. I want to talk to you about this issue. Can you explain more to me about why you said that and what is behind that? And then if that is not the same as the stated values of that individual, then you can say, you have said this is your stated value. And then I heard you say this. Can you help me understand that? And she said most of the time what will happen is that people will go, I didn't think of it like that. I'm appalled I said that. I've got some stuff to work on. Which is a person that recognizes their inherent goodness and the fact that we are limited and mortal. If we do not do this ever, people won't grow. But if we just flamethrower them, we are tearing apart our own movement. The last thing she said is there are times when you don't have the energy to call someone in, or you don't have the relationship to. So it might be a Thanksgiving meal where Uncle Hal says something really rude about a group. And you might say, Uncle Hal, she says, I know you. I know that if a member of that community had their tire blow out in front of your house, you would get out your pickup and you'd go down and help them change their tire, wouldn't you? Well, yes, I would. Then how can such hateful things come out of your mouth? I know you, Uncle Hal. So I think part of what we need to do is learn to use a conjunction that I think we're all familiar with. And we got to keep recognizing that there's a much more complex set of situations happening in Israel, Gaza, in Palestine, in China, in Central Africa, all over the world, and that we need to just take some time to recognize the limits of our own knowledge and our own relationships, and to try to work for justice, but also work with justice to the people that we're debating with. Because the reality is the pain of the current situation in our world is so deep, the traumas are so real. How we're going to get to our vision of the world, well, that's going to take a lot of steps. And maybe those are a lot of steps that we can only take 2 or 3. And we got to have some conversation about our strategies, how we are as a group, how I as a person am going to go from where we leave from where we are to where we want to go. And that strategy conversation is always incredibly difficult. And we got to think about how human beings work. Let's Go Together is in part about strategy. Because I talk with people of all wisdom traditions, literally, atheist to Zoroastrian, about what strategy do we use when we're divided and unequal. And they said, first we got to get to know each other and eat together. Second, we got to do a project together based on shared values. And third, we got to learn how to honor each other in public. Now that's only one part of a broader strategy to strengthen our democracy, but it's an important one. And then lastly here, as we kind of think about our own views on this or any other issue, who are you talking to? Are you going to and talking to people who have a direct or at least a second degree connection to the issues in a place? Because they're really going to help you understand things more. Who are you not talking to? And I agree, we can't talk to everybody. None of us have time for that. There are some people we know we're not going to have productive conversations with. But are there some folk that we're kind of having some bias and bigotry toward? We got to just go listen a little bit. Who's in your head? I have a whole inner council of people. It is made up of a huge mishmash of people, right? Christian, atheist, Zoroastrian guy is very powerful in my head. K is in my head, sorry, it's true. I have Muslims and Jews and Sikhs and all kinds of people in my council in my head. Is there a parent or somebody that you're listening to that in your own head that you need a little freedom from? Who do you feel accountable to, and what does it say about who you want to be? Knowing that none of us can be everything that's perfect because we're limited and mortal, right? So I'm skipping this one. And so I just want to say that this Israel-Palestine thing, it's so complicated like everything else, and our culture is trying to immediately get us into one side versus another. But I think even in this political season, where we need to draw sharp contrasts and say, hey, this is what we're for, these are our values, this is how they fit into human rights in the world, this is how they fit into the aspirational constitutional values of our country. This is the policy I think is better. And I know that there's a lot of work out there that basically says there is no such thing as policy, it's just one team versus another. But I do want to remind us that there are a whole lot of people that are not bought in on one team versus another and are kind of tired of it. And when they get fire hosed from one side or another, they're kind of drawn to the other side. Here's the other thing that's hard for progressives and people who want to change the system, is that we also have to help them understand that that the system that is currently supporting them is still going to be there for them. We just want to make sure it's there for everyone, and that when it's there for everyone, everyone's stronger. And I think there are times when we leave out one part of that messaging, because when things change, what happens to people? They don't want to change that light bulb because maybe the room will go dark. So we got to help them understand that we can change and things can be better. But we can't do that if we're fundamentally disrespectful to them as they share their fear for their family or their neighborhood or their city. And sometimes in politics we do that. So I know that's a whole lot tonight, and I was hoping for more interaction, but it's getting to be you can, right now our website's down, but typically you can go to path2understanding.org, and there's a little place on there called Share Your Story, and you can tell me how crazy I am. I also have, this is the very last thing, I just finished writing a book. It just came out 3 weeks ago, and it is intended to help Christians find their motivations for respecting, working with, learning from, and honoring publicly people of diverse traditions, cultures, and life circumstances. And so it's taken me a couple of years to write the thing. So it is here, and I have a chip reader and stuff, but you don't have to do that. But I just wanted to let you know that it's there, because part of my work is to help Christians do their work that needs to happen right now to counter the Christian nationalism that's on the rise. And it's not enough to simply talk about how bad Christian nationalism is. We actually have to talk about what an alternative is. That's not your guys' job, that's my job, Marlene. So I so appreciate everyone coming tonight. And I don't want to go too much longer, right?
You can. You go.
Okay, so do you have any thoughts or responses or questions that you'd like to ask tonight? Yeah.
Retired teacher.
Yeah.
I just wondered if you have any programs that you go where you go into the school that you so needed in the school.
So we just hired a youth engagement person named Hannah, and she'd be here tonight, but she's sick. And we are not primarily doing work in schools, but we do work to bring youth of different traditions together, and then help them to be the leaders that they need to be. So we're not working directly with schools, we're more trying to get people of different cultures and traditions together. But then what happens is that sometimes we get invited to schools because of the work the students are doing. And so that's how we sort of enter into that space. But in Washington State and in many other states across the country, it's a little bit difficult to come in and do an interfaith kind of interfaith thing, because sometimes schools have been taught that they can't talk about wisdom traditions in school, which I don't believe the law states. But we do try to work on it that way.
Can I speak to that?
Please.
Yeah, I was going to say thank you.
One of the reasons that I do this work and share about our culture, our history, and where we're at today is for our children. So that when people in the community meet my children and my grandchildren in my community, they have a different vision of who they are and the journey that their families have been on. And so much of this work is so we can relate better, but we also have different visions of different communities. So that work, I believe, will help generations to come. So while it will be happening more with Hannah being here in youth, you're going to go back and have different experiences that you get to share with your children, your grandchildren, and your community. And I think that's what's so important.
I think I'm getting
Thank
more
you.
at, I don't think it needs to be religious,
No.
but it's how do people talk to each other?
Oh, I see.
How do they learn the words? It's so important to know
I
the
see.
words to say to each other so that you can get what you're saying and not have people come back at you
It's fascinating.
and throw it in your lap like a thing. And I think if people learn that as a teenager,
Yeah.
it certainly might help.
I think the way we would do that is as we get into our second or third year of youth engagement, we would have the youth lead that conversation. Because that's the core of our curricula, is to help students recognize their deep values, be able to say them, be able to listen to other people, be able to negotiate with their parents what they're saying as young people, negotiate with their communities what they're saying, even though it may be a little different than what their teachers may say at this point, but learn to still work off common values with students that are quite different from them. And so I will remember what you're saying, and we will find the right time for us to do that. Yeah, thank you.
Are there any more
Other
questions?
thoughts or questions or?
I have a comment. I was saying they didn't like her microphone, so I better use it. Sorry. Terry, I totally admire you, and I totally appreciate your time and what you're doing. And thank you very much for coming this evening.
Yeah.
Totally appreciate you. Also, please forgive me. I am not so much into religion, so.
It's fine.
But
I'm not either, actually, but we can talk about that.
It's very admirable the way you put things in and the way you relate to issues. In my case, I happen to be a little bit, I tend to read some of these investigative reports, and I
Sure.
belong to a number of societies here
Sure.
and there. And I tend to look at the root cause, what is happening, and then you follow up on who's benefiting from these.
That's right.
And it's difficult not to get angry
Of course.
when you find out there are, a handful of people are benefiting from this.
Yes.
And they invest a lot of money and time, and they go in and they do all of these divisive issues, and they do all of these hateful issues. They make individuals in the community
Yes.
hate each other,
Yes.
so they can benefit from it.
Yep.
They have absolutely no qualm about killing people for profits. And this is really the issue that angers me, so to speak.
Yes.
And when you're trying to say something, then people say, "Are you crazy? Are you listening to James Bond?" So again, thank you.
So I want to honor Muslim bigotry in the United States. And then what would happen is I would go to a public event and this guy would come up to me and say, I researched it on the internet, that Muslims do this. That the hijab is about women's subjugation, when in fact Islam taught in the 7th century a pretty radical notion of women's rights. For instance, like they could divorce, they could own property, and et cetera, hold public office, all those kind of things. And so, who's benefiting from that? And part of what we said in one of our videos was it's people who profit from fear. So the security services that people offer, the bombs and the bullets and the guns and all that kind of stuff, right? Profit off this fear. I was in Jerusalem and going from the Holocaust Museum down to the Old City, and this Muslim Palestinian taxi cab driver gave me a ride. And he asked what I was doing in town. He told me that I must have some ancestry from the Middle East because of my dark circles under my eyes. And he says, so we're cousins, And I said, what do the locals here say about what the real issue is? He says, it's not the people. We get along quite well. Someone has Christmas celebration, we go to the Christmas celebration. If someone is Ramadan, they come to our place. If it's some Jewish celebration, we go with them. We love each other. We've been here. It's the money bags who want to make profit off of all the war machine, right? And so they keep trying to turn us against each other. So I agree with you, and that's part of what we mean when we talk about the structural, right? And then how that gets activated by people. And certainly, I was talking to a man who's part of does hate group research, and he said that in the last election in 2022, 830 candidates for Republican office holders had liked white supremacist or white nationalist websites or Facebook pages. And so I asked him, I said, well, dude, you sound just like a conspiracy theorist here, You sound like, if it was today, I would say, man, you just all in on Taylor Swift, But the difference is, he said, he laughed, and he said, thank you for asking that, but the difference is that I actually have the documentation. And so I'm not just making a conspiracy theory, I'm trying to talk about how very, very powerful moneyed interests are at work to draw us apart from each other.
Why not bomb the manufacturers of the war equipment?
Well, I'm not going.
Let them fight each other.
I understand. I get what you're saying. I can't sign on exactly because I don't want to see anybody bomb, but I totally get what you're saying.
They would be there. They're on an island.
Could we turn swords into plowshares, right? Could we work at that? I agree with you about that. And I understand you were being funny. It was good. Any other thoughts or questions before we wrap it up?
Yeah, maybe. I'm going to tell a story on myself a little bit.
Yeah.
I have too many Facebook friends, and they're from numerous backgrounds.
Yeah.
And so sometimes things get posted that really anger me. And I used to just kind of ignore them, and then I got to a point where I couldn't.
Yeah.
And then I had to respond. And this is kind of a minor one, but the other day, a dear friend of mine from my childhood just reposted a thing. And it's been around for quite a while. She didn't know that, but it's that Mark Zuckerberg had banned the posting of the Lord's Prayer. She's a devout Catholic, practicing, and was offended by that, and so thought it was appropriate to repost. And I sent a note to Paula, well, actually, I did the wrong thing. I commented on the post.
Yeah.
Now, gently,
Yeah.
I said, Paula, I need to tell you that this has been floating around the internet for at least 3 years and has been proven false on a number of occasions. There are a lot of issues with Facebook, but this isn't one of them. I don't know where that started. It's clearly an anti-Semitic trope. It's a lot of other things. And I let that sit there, and she answered back to me very kindly and said, you know, but it was pretty terse sentence. But thank me for calling it to her attention.
Yeah.
And I looked at that and I said, I owe Paul an apology. So I wrote back to her publicly, said, I need to apologize to you because I should have sent this to you as a private message. Because I know that you wanted to know. I can tell how you responded that you wanted to know. And I apologize to you for putting it as a comment.
So that is a perfect example for what Facebook does to us. And so we can't fight Facebook with Facebook. We got to fight Facebook with face-to-face. So it's okay to be on Facebook, but I think what you're teaching all of us from your, you know, again, I think very understandable misstep, right? Is that let's skip the Facebook comment section and let's just go straight to the person. Because the reality is, how could she possibly keep up with all of the various disinformation that is on Facebook at any given moment? And then there are Christians that feel under siege in some senses. And I have a conversation on our YouTube channel with an atheist leader, AmericanAtheist.org. She's a lawyer for them. We talked about some of that, and of course she says we're not anti-religion or anti-God or anti-Christian. We just have organized our life without reference to that. And so there was a beautiful conversation, but but she's a Catholic, she's a Christian, so she's feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm under siege, whatever. And that's an understandable feeling. And so when that algorithm recognizes that she's Catholic, it zaps her with that, and then she feels more fear for her community, and then she says this thing. Just like all the comments about George Soros, right? And I've had family members go off on me about how terrible George Soros is, And I said, I don't know George Soros, so I've not researched anything about him. What I can tell you is that the language about him functions within a framework of anti-Semitism, using and it's also it's also racially bigoted toward other groups, because the white nationalist narrative about Jewish people falsely is that Jewish people are in control of everything from the top, oppressing white Christians from above, while they equip immigrants and people of color to steal from below. That is the way that narrative works, and that's all false. And I said, so I don't care what you believe about George Soros. You need to understand how your language is functioning in the society right now, and that you are actually placing your Jewish sisters and brothers in physical jeopardy. And now that took like 3 minutes of conversation for me to say that. So we have a more complicated argument, but he actually heard what I said.
I appreciate what you said is that somebody probably read that and will think about how they might respond. So you may have touched other people in that. I had somebody correct me on something I didn't know about, and I appreciated that, because I don't like using misrepresented that I thought it was true, and it was an old high school friend, and I appreciate that. But I really honor the way you did that, and then people would stop and think, how do I respond to that with respect to maybe what they're feeling or thinking, or they just didn't know. That was really respectful.
I agree. I think you're to be commended for telling us too.
Yeah.
Well, it was a lesson learned that I had to teach myself. But
Well, I think that you probably helped other people in this place where we're reactionary, right? There's some terrible things on Facebook, but I think that you may have helped other people respond in respectful ways. So that was really awesome.
That's called hope.
Yes, thank you. We all live there.
And remember that we only hear about the viral post of some group trash talking another group. You know, Anderson Cooper 365 is not going to see this post from you and say, here's a conversation that actually arose out of Facebook between two friends. I've said to media people, why is it that I can have, like, you know, these events with American Muslims and have, you know, all kinds of communities join us to talk about our unity, and you guys don't show up. But if I bought a gun and said I'm going to solve some problem in the country with my gun as a Lutheran pastor, I'd be talking to Anderson Cooper tonight. And I like Anderson Cooper, right? Yeah. I met a dog in Marysville whose name was Anderson Pooper. It looked just like him. And he's actually been on Anderson Cooper's show, so Anderson's pretty cool, you know. But I'm just saying, like, there's a fear machine, and remember that the fear machine it's not just what's happening on the TV or the Facebook post that's happening. It's where our eyeballs go, where our attention gets drawn, is typically towards something that is threatening someone that we love. And that is fundamentally a good thing, but it requires constant reappraisal on our part. And so when people who were really hating on Muslims or Jews would come up to me and say how they're a threat to someone that they love, you know, I would say to them, look, I love what you love too. I have a daughter, or I have a this, or I have a, you know, and so I share that value with you. But what I want to tell you is I have learned that our American Muslim sisters and brothers share that value too. And that you're being lied to by someone who's trying to use your love for your family against your Muslim neighbors, because I think if you got to know them, you would love them too, and that you would love what you love together. That's the kind of way I try to talk to them. And sometimes what happened to people is amazing. Because, you know, I'm not trying to impersonate Donald Trump here, but this man, this big, strong man, this really powerful man came up with tears in his eyes. And I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying this, but the person would kind of tear up. And because I did not shame them for loving what they love, I tried to help them understand that what they were fearing was based on a lie. And that it was keeping them from working with their neighbors and other traditions. And then you'd see a different person. But that's really hard work. That's soul work. And I know that we're in a political season, and it's not going to be easy this year. But I think we can build our movement better when we're wise to, like, what's happening in human beings and in ourselves, and offer a solution that is both working for justice and working with justice. So thank you all for coming tonight.